They would be so excited to see you.
All right, Jim. I think
Okay,
we can get
are we ready to
started.
start? We have a quorum, to start the meeting of the Montpelier-Roxbury Board of School Directors, they're 6:32, Wednesday, August 21st. First order of business is public comment. I would go through my public comments spiel, but I'm not sure anyone's out there to hear it.
Nobody is here.
So,
I think we're good.
we're good on public comment. And I also want to welcome teachers came back today, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, teachers and staff, welcome back. Students will follow in a week. So yeah, hope everyone had a good summer and good start to the day. So consent agenda, since there probably might be people out there watching, the consent agenda is where we approve pro forma things like minutes of past meetings, approve hires, etc. Things that generally do not require board discussion. If a board member feels that they have questions about something or that something does require discussion, they can pull it off of the agenda and we can discuss them and then approve separately. We just had in closed public comment. Do you, since you made the effort to come here, do you intend to, or you're just best thing to do on a Wednesday night?
The plates are big.
Yes. Okay. Do you have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move we approve the consent agenda.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Any questions or comments? Yes.
I just wanted to say thanks for the links for the legislative stuff in your superintendent's report. And the letter from the VSBA and the VSA and, you know, all those these groups. If folks haven't had a chance to read it yet, I definitely encourage you to. The tool sort of like addendum to the letter. The letter is just 1 page long, but the addendum to it is about 12 or something, but has a lot of really good stuff in there for us to be starting to think about now when it comes to the budget. And I really liked the questions that they offered to school boards to be asking around the budget. And I think we maybe want to think about those even as like guiding for the presentations as we get started. So I found them very useful. So
Heather Boucher is the president of CAS.
Yeah, Heather
Bushy.
Bushy is the director of finance for Essex Westford. She's the new head of BASBO. So that is a different Heather Bushy. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's a very good question. Very good question. She's great. She'll be wonderful. Morgan Daybell did it last year and Heather will do great this year.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Tim?
Mia, just to your point, I was just getting together with Scott and Jake, and we were thinking sort of along the lines that letter jogged in us as a finance committee that it probably makes sense for us to start meeting to kind of facilitate those very questions. So I think we're going to try and get together next week just to start thinking in those terms so that we can hopefully develop a little bit of a repository of expertise on the matter to the extent that's possible with this topic.
cool.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, consent agenda passes. So I think the next item is to just kind of recap the process we created last week.
Let me pull up my draft that I wrote.
Perfect. Do you want to do the recap or do you want me to? Gonna go off and thank you again for taking notes, Jill.
Yeah, thank you to Jill. So based on Jill's notes. Let's make that a little bigger.
was Ross, actually.
Based on Jill's notes, I compiled them into a formalized process that has gone through, Jim and Mia's eyes, but, we can look through the full board's eyes now. So just because the board hasn't seen it, members of the board haven't seen it. This document lays out the intentional process the MFPS Board of School Directors will engage in to make decisions pertaining to a high-quality education for all our students and fiscally responsible governance of our district. While there's a set process for one main function and decision of the board a year determining the annual budget. There are many decisions the board makes that happens outside that process, and this document is an attempt to guide the board in those decisions. When a topic is brought to the board, in public comment or presentation, the board will make time at a subsequent meeting to ask the predetermination questions to decide one of the following. Enter the process as laid out below, ask a committee or administration to look into the issue or not take the matter up at the time. So questions for predetermination. What's the challenge the board has been asked to address? What is the question the board needs or that needs the board's attention? Does this challenge fall within the board's responsibility? Does the board have the power or authority to make a decision regarding this particular challenge? What policy or statute gives the board authority within this domain? Is the challenge or question in front of the board one the board has to contend with? Should the board take this issue up? Is it one that needs significant input from a variety of stakeholders in the community? And does the board have capacity to take up this issue at the time? So the board would have a discussion using those questions to guide the discussion. The board will decide via general consensus or a vote of the board members whether or not to enter in a process. If the board decides no, it does not need a process, the board chair will write a well-reasoned message to the public that details why the board has decided to not take up this particular issue, so nothing's left hanging for the person who brought it to the board. If the board decides yes, it will enter a process in regards to the issue. The process is described below. We'll have a planning meeting. So the board planning meeting is intended to lay out how the process will unfold in the coming months. Unless there's a sense of urgency around the decision needed, this will occur at a regularly scheduled board meeting. At this meeting, the board will determine and formalize in a public document. What's the exact question the board is attempting to answer? Who is the ultimate decision maker, the board or the administration? What intentional steps will the board take to obtain opinions and information from a variety of stakeholders, paying particular attention and gathering information from members of the community who are from historically marginalized identities? Potential steps are public comment at a board meeting, board or administration office hours in the community, surveys, community forums, either during board meetings or at different times, stakeholder sessions, a vote of the public. How will the board know they have gathered enough information from the stakeholders is something that should be considered. And what will the board do if they cannot gather enough information from stakeholders? And then another question the board can decide in the planning meeting, what data will the board need the administration to obtain for them? Some ideas, budgetary considerations and constraints, potential impacts to district or school systems, human resources required for every option, and just anything else the board can decide. And then decide on a timeline for the decision-making process so people know when the decision will be made. Throughout the process, the board will consider if this is an issue, if this issue is a continuation of a current goal or does it deviate from the stated goals of the school district? How do our district values guide our decisions in this process? What are all the options the board can consider? What is the dollar amount for the options presented? What is the impact on the MRPS faculty and staff for each option? What's the impact on the larger community for each option? Pay particular attention to the impacts on communities from historically marginalized identity and try to measure that disparity. What impacts would these options have on the student body? How does the board know? And what types of data might the administration provide to aid in decision-making? And then following the timeline, the board will make a decision. Should the board need to gather more information, they will make a formal amendment to the established timeline so the public knows. The board shall vote on the issue at a warned public meeting. The board chair or their designee will write a formal summary of the process and detail the ultimate decision. This will be public on the MRPS website on the board's page. Jill, did I miss anything?
If you did, I didn't. Know. I like how you.
Organized it?
Yeah.
I like how you've organized it too. Any questions about that or kind of further thoughts? And we've had a week. I think it looks really solid.
Is it what people were imagining?
I just want to make sure, will we see it if Tim raises his hand?
Oh, no. I'm gonna stop sharing.
Yeah, and Tim, if you just want to shout out.
Yeah,
um,
that's also fine.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, thanks. I appreciate you putting this together, Libby. I mean, I think I'd like to look at it. It was hard for me to see it because I'm only looking at this on my phone. So that was kind of painful to try and squint and look at it. So I'm hopeful that we can, and I kind of just wanted to go back with my notes on it too as well. I'm hopeful we can kind of look at this and maybe take it up at a next meeting if we're going to think about adopting it or something like that.
Yeah, I can share it with, I should have linked it in to this meeting agenda. I'm sorry, I didn't. I wouldn't think about it.
No, no worries. It looked like a lot of work. So I appreciate the effort on it. I just want to kind of sit with it for a minute.
I was wondering, Tim, if it would. We created it last week in the abstract, thinking like, if there is a question to answer, how to, that comes to the board. What process are we gonna follow? What are the questions we're gonna ask? You were there. You participated very helpfully. And so, but I'm just recapping that to say that was all in the abstract. And I think one of the ways that we can figure out if this is really what we want or should be using is to kind of try it on with a real question. So I was thinking, it doesn't have to be tonight, but I think we're really going to know whether or not this works for us by trying it out. And it seems like the question of what to do with Roxbury Village School is a good way to try out this process. Because it is a question before the board and we do need to make a decision on it. We want to set a timeline for ourselves. So anyway, that's my thought, is that in order to make this like a concrete thing, I think the best way to do it is to just get started trying it.
yeah, and I think RVS fits very squarely within what we kind of put this out to do.
I also think that as we get started with it, we can always say, oh, we thought we needed that question, but we can throw it out, it doesn't, it can remain in draft form, maybe, I don't know. I'm not sure if what it means to like formally adopt a process either as a board.
That's part of what I wanted
to,
that's, honestly, part of what I wanted to think about. I guess one of the things I was thinking of after the meeting was, to the extent we adopt this, and I'm wondering if the manner in which we adopt this or the process of adoption at all could create some sort of process right to someone who is, feels aggrieved by whatever the ultimate decision is, that could, maybe subject us to a legal challenge. And so I just wanted to think about that. And, so if we say this is our process and then we maybe skip question 3E inadvertently, do we kind of catch ourselves on our own
hook? Is that what you're saying? Uh-oh. Maybe have lost Tim.
It still appears to be there. I mean, I know he's on his phone.
Tim, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Yeah, you're also our faint connection to a quorum.
Is that a question that we would want to ask our legal counsel, whether or not a process creates a vulnerability in the event that community members don't like the outcome of the process?
I think it's not a policy.
I mean, I think if we don't formally adopt it, if we just agree to it, then I don't think we really have a problem.
No, I don't either.
If we formally adopted it, I think it's worth asking in case. My strong sense, and obviously don't take this, something we need to confirm, is that if there's not something prescribed in statute, or if there then
Or policy.
yeah, then we're probably okay. The problem is if we adopt it, then what is it? Is it
right
a de facto policy? Is it viewed as a de facto policy?
Mhm.
even if we call it something else. And I don't think we have to adopt it. And I think I think the other I think advantage of not adopting it and just informally agreeing on it is that I think it makes it easy for the board to keep revisiting it and saying, well, this question is kind of useless, or we haven't asked this question, we should, so it can kind of be a more of a living document. Rather than something we'd have to go through a formal process to revise or we like forget about it and then suddenly somebody reminds us that, hey, you've got this formal process you adopted that you haven't used for the last 6 months.
Yeah, I would call it just a guiding document that we have agreed to at some point and it can change. And also, we certainly aren't limiting ourselves to only asking these questions either, right?
Yeah.
And
That's correct.
some
Yeah.
question might need more of these, and some might be a little more straightforward, and we may not. So I don't want to lose the questions. It just might sort of sit there. So I sort of I almost think of like a standard operating procedure, but it doesn't even have to be that formal. Just like this is a guiding document when a decision comes before the board that's outside of the normal process. We've got a guiding document. We want to make sure we revisit at the start of that conversation. That's as formal as I think it needs to be.
Tim, are you still there?
Yes, did I cut out?
Yeah, I think maybe there was a
A little
point at
bit.
which you were talking and then all of a sudden you stopped, but it's good to know you're still there. So we can continue the meeting.
Aye.
So we can continue the meeting, and two, so you can be part of the conversation.
Yes. Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay, so do we want this on the next agenda? Do we want to give it a go?
I say we give it a go with the RVS question we're about to go into as we kind of enter that and yeah, I think we can think about keep the formal adoption question alive, maybe ask Pietro if there's any legal risk, bring it up again next time, see how other members feel. I don't think it's necessary that we formally adopt it. I think as long as we kind of have full consent or full consensus, we just make sure we use it. Tim, do you want to say something? Or the green light is,
You got the green square.
yeah, well, you had the green square.
Yeah. Tim, you raised the issue of whether or not we need to formally adopt it, or if it's gonna get us into unintentional hot water, I guess, summarize what I heard you say. Do you think going forward to just give it a go
I
while
don't know what you
also-
got last go round. I'm happy to use it this summer. Yeah.
Okay,
I just wanted to, I don't want to formally adopt it right now.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
That was my big point. And,
Yep,
but I think it makes total sense to use as a guide for this conversation about Roxbury.
Okay,
So, which I think, any other questions or comments on that? Great. Let's move to the Roxbury building question. Guess we can start on our chart. Do you want to put it back up on the screen so we can?
Yeah.
so that Tim can squint at it.
Yeah, if you can look at it, exactly.
make it
This is
big.
what you just sent it, right? Is this what you're talking, the thing you sent by email, Libby?
Yes,
That's the process document. So this blank document is, I'm just gonna be the note taker for the board as
Oh, I
you
see.
all gather questions of what needs to get answered.
Cool. Thank you.
I will let Mia or Jim facilitate the conversation.
Yes, I'm happy to. You sent that document because it was very helpful. So obviously I just want to start with, this is, something that I think the town of Roxbury has been asking, and first off, the RVS students, or the Roxbury elementary students, are entering UAS in a week. And really hopeful that goes excellently, and I'm sure it will. And I know that everything's being done to make sure that they are welcomed. And I also know that, I think friendships already started with some of the work that was done at the end of last year to introduce kids. And I know that's a really, really big deal for the community of Roxbury, and we're really paying attention to that, and are going to make sure that works well for families and kids. Doing all we can to make sure that goes well. I think we're on kind of just to set out where we're at. We're on a timeline, at least from our perspective, because there's the budget question in probably November, when we get a draft budget that we're going to have to start to answer, about whether we're going to include continued maintenance of the building. Obviously I think the plan is to continue to maintain the building. We, as long as it's under our purview, that we are going to be good stewards of the property and of the building on it. And it's also, the only way that the district can transfer the building to another ownership is with board approval. So this is not something the administration can do on its own. That said, we do not control whether the town of Roxbury wants to activate the clause in the building that allows them to buy it back. And we may want to get some clarity on if Roxbury does not, and I have to admit, I did not dig deeply into the merger document, maybe someone else did, what the timeline is for us determining that they're not interested, or otherwise offering the building to a potential different buyer. So that's kind of the context and the question. So I mean, I think we're kind of stuck. Not just stuck, I think we have an obligation to ask the question in the context of the budget process. I think there's a question of whether we want to just keep it at the board level, or maybe have the facilities committee do some work, and whether we have time to have the facilities committee do some work. And I think we are certainly going to ask the administration to answer some questions about the building. But my sense is, just given the timing, that we're probably not going to have a lot of time to give it to you and then have you go away for a while and come back.
No, we can answer questions pretty quickly.
Yeah. And I'm not sure we have the luxury of not taking up the matter at the time being. So that's kind of where we're at with the initial questions. Any additional thoughts on the outlay there?
So in terms of timeline, does the board want to make its decision regarding the building in terms of keeping it in the budget or not by the first budget meeting is always the first December board meeting, first meeting in December? Would that be a date that the board wants to set? for decisions
Yes.
from our perspective, from the MRPS perspective.
And then that would then, so town meeting day would come based on that budget, which would be the FY 26 budget.
That's right.
And sorry, I didn't dig back into the merger document.
I can like paraphrase and someone can correct me, but it looks like, the board can convey the building, the property to the town of Roxbury and or its school district for the sum of $1. They're required to use it for community and public purposes for a minimum of 5 years. And if they don't, there's additional language here about compensation for any improvements the district had done.
Yes.
But just so, I don't know if everyone listening really understood that.
And my question, because it's a process question, is if the district is no longer using it for school use, does Roxbury have a right to buy it back for $1?
We shall
Or just an
offer such
option.
real property,
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have the obligation to offer it for $1. But it seems to me the question is, I think our first determination as I was looking at this is whether or not the building is unnecessary to the continued operation of the district and its educational programs. And I know we decided that we're not using it as a school, but that seems to be a different question. Like, are there any other uses? I know we're using it as an after-school program right now. Is that an educational program of the district? I think that seems to be a preliminary question that we at least need to understand what it means and answer that, because that seems to be what triggers the obligation to offer on a quick read of this section.
Tim, can you repeat that question for me?
if there's another use within the district as we're now constructed for the building, right, for educational purposes?
Pretty
Oh, boy.
No.
Jill, you have the merger document open?
Yeah.
Well, I
I
mean,
think he's
it's,
finding it in there.
yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it now and it says, in the event that the school board determines at its discretion and subjects to the school closure provision in 6C, which I think we've already got, that any real property, including land and building, conveyed to it under the terms of these articles. So it seems like we are the voice on whether it's necessary or not for
Yes,
the continued
but we
education.
would ask the administration for information to help us determine that.
Exactly, but yeah, but it's our call to make based on that information.
So it seems like we've gotten now into, I'm just, because we are also using this as a try it on for our
Yes.
process.
in the thing, and it says, when we determine to the continued.
Okay, thank you.
Well,
Just trying.
there's the overall question. So the overall guiding question is something like, does the Roxbury Village School have a use in the Montpelier-Roxbury School District for educational purposes
Yep,
in the FY 26 budget
or beyond, right?
Yeah.
I think we
in
want
the
to.
foreseeable future?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just gonna say that we're bubbling our way through this of using the process. It sounds like, Jim, your context that you gave, you were also making attempt to answer the predetermination questions.
Well,
Say, yes, we should, the board, this is something we should use this process for.
yes, I think,
Okay.
well, and part of it is figuring out kind of this process, like, what question are we answering? It sounds like the first question we need to answer is the, does the board feel that it's necessary for the future educational use of, and if we answer yes to that question, then it triggers an obligation that,
We'll fund it.
Right, yeah. Okay, so I guess what I'm trying to find out, are you still in the predetermination or have we moved beyond that?
I think we're moving into the actual process.
Into the
Yes,
actual process
yes.
of determining what questions we want to, what the
Yeah.
timeline is, et cetera. Okay,
It'll be
great.
below the blue box.
I think, yes,
Yeah,
okay,
I think,
exactly.
I think we've set out that the board needs to take some sort of action, and
Yes,
it's a question of what that action is, but yeah, we need to take action.
Yeah.
To make a decision within the budget of for FY 26, which is a crazy year.
Crazy.
and I'm gathering from the participation in the conversation that the rest of the board agrees with that, like that we should,
Use the new process.
like, let's
Yeah.
go blow the blue box. And you shared this with board members now, Libby. I think, given that we will probably come back to this in subsequent meetings, can you also get in the board packet for
Yep.
this meeting, just so that anybody
Yep.
watching at home or who comes back to
Anna's on,
this
she's
has-
got it.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, okay, great. I just wanted to make sure we're all on the same literal page of the actual process.
So it seems like going to the predetermined question for the board, the question that the board the immediate question the board needs to mention is whether we feel the building is. Larger document again, is it necessary?
I mean, it's like at a basic level, it's should we keep it or not?
Mhm.
And then in order to determine that, we need to know, do we have an educational use for it?
Yes,
Is, you know, and then I think for other questions would be, okay, well then, if we kept it, what would the costs be?
Yeah.
If we decide not to keep it, what are the costs?
well, I think we need to answer does it have an educational use before we answer, do we keep it or not? Because if the question is no, it doesn't have an educational use, then we don't have, then we have to offer it. The only way we can
Oh,
keep it is.
then
if
there's
we
no
feel-
there's no reason to even balance costs and,
Yeah, like,
I see.
as soon as we determine
I
it doesn't have an educational use, we are obligated to at least
see.
offer it to the town of Roxbury
I see,
for $1.
okay. What were you gonna say, Rhett?
That's what I was gonna say,
Yeah.
that first question is there an educational use? And what, you know,
What is it?
there should be some context, either yes or no, with some context.
And, yeah.
Just so that there's an explanation for the public if the answer is yes. But you know, if the answer is no, then there should be some reasons, I think, that are legitimate and easily understood,
Yeah,
whether agreed upon or not.
So
easily
would it be helpful to know, I don't want to put words in the board's mouth, instead of saying yes or no, is there a use? What might be the potential educational uses for the RVS building? And then there's kind of sub questions in there, right? So what, how much human resources would it need for this?
uh-huh,
What might be a timeline for getting it up and running? You know, like how long would it take to get that up and running? What, you know, because all of these things impact the decision for the board.
Yeah.
Right? The school board, for instance, the school board might say, yes, make it an outdoor education center for our people. Well, then that decision has monetary, human resource, timeline,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. So
Right.
and then somebody else might say, let's make it an alternative educational space for the region. Well, that has timeline implications and human resources, you know what I mean? So I would think the board would want at least ballpark figures around those things.
And I think we have to put some sort of, it's not in the agreement, but I think it's best interpreted through the lens of kind of, is there an actual intended use? Because any structure has a potential theoretical educational use.
oh, yeah,
Yeah,
I think I see where you're going, Jim, or maybe I'm just
like,
going there,
do
which
we
is
actually
like,
realistically
Right.
intend to use the building for an educational use?
Right.
Or feel that that's a realistic possibility, rather than, of course, someone could turn it into a
Mhm.
outdoor school, like.
But I think unless
We
it's
gotta
on
turn it
public
into
record of what
Right.
all that implies. I think the board needs to be as transparent as possible and I think there needs to be some numbers attached to it so that when somebody asks Jill, she can say, you know, we looked into that.
Yeah.
And in order to make it an outdoor educational center, we need this many adults and they cost this. And you know what I mean? Like, I think that's an important piece so that Should the board come to no as an answer, then there's on record that the board has had a discussion about that.
Yeah.
In my opinion, based on where we are politically at the moment.
Yeah, and it's good. Good practice too. I think another question we would want answered is what's the interest of the town of Roxbury? You know, within this context of educational purposes. I don't know if that's necessarily a question for the administration, Libby, but I think it is a question we want answered. Yeah,
Say it again.
basically, what does the Roxbury community think? Which
Yeah.
I think we have some sense of it from last year, but I also think, given where we are now, it's a good question to re-ask. Within this context of the board making a decision about whether or not Montpelier-Roxbury district holds on to the school, what does the community of Roxbury think about that? And maybe there's a better specific way to ask that question.
Can you add Tim as a panelist? He said he was able to find a copy.
Oh,
Oh, good.
yep, thank you. Hold on 1 second. Hold on.
You might have to, oh,
Sorry, no.
oh, that's
Do
cool.
things. I think that intentionality is really important because it's hard to think about. We could dream big of all kinds of uses, but the reality is we had to make the hard decision to close the school, which was not an outdoor education center, wasn't, right? So like that feels kind of, we do have some sense of where the voters are as far as the uses and had to make a pretty tough decision. So the idea of replacing that with a different set of human resources and a different set of costs feels unfortunate.
Well,
Other questions, and these don't need to be in order, so you just have them.
Yeah,
I mean, I feel like there are these other possibilities, and I think that sort of hashing out why these possibilities might be a good direction for the district to go, or why they are not a good direction for the district to go is, I think, important in terms of transparency, because I think there may be people that say, well, you know, it could easily be used for this. Why isn't it being used for that? And having answers to some of those questions, I think, is important.
so it's like the pros and cons.
Maybe for some of these possibilities. And
Uh-huh.
I know that at one point apparently there was a study at one point, maybe prior, I don't know when, about the possibility of an immersion,
Language immersion. Mhm.
language immersion question. So that's a question. There is the outdoor education idea, which I don't know the context to that question nor understand it, but I know that there's a lot of folks in Roxbury that but really believe in that type of education. And then there are also, like, I don't know how many of these scenarios we might want to consider, but there's certainly a great deal of mental health needs. Don't know how that fits, and I don't know how we determine which scenarios we want to put a little effort into, or whether that's necessary. But to just say it's not an elementary school, therefore no educational value, I think is a little short-sighted, and we could be a little bit more thorough. If that's fair to ask of the administration, I don't know.
Yeah,
Another question is, how legally binding is the merger document? And are there other state laws that apply here?
Oh, yeah.
When it comes to things like, does Roxbury can the select board alone take ownership? Does the select board have to get the town to vote whether to take ownership? I don't know if that's necessarily a question for us or a question for them.
Or a question
There-
for Roxbury.
There is a packet that the select board has in their meeting minutes from 8/5 that has some of their questions. The way that they answered some of these questions. So I don't know if that's opposing resource or if it's certainly a resource to me.
Brett, did I capture your
Can
two
the school
questions
board
right there?
alone vote in this decision? Does the town of Roxbury need to vote on? Yes.
And then how legally binding is the merger document?
Yes. Are there other state laws?
Yep.
Can any, I guess, can the school board s-
Can the school board waive any of the provisions? in the
yeah,
document?
I guess, can the school
Does the
board,
school board have
can
the
the school
authority?
board change the parameters that are outlined in the document?
Or waive.
Another question is, what constitutes community use? Are there? And how would that be monitored?
How
or
would,
assessed?
how would that question help us answer whether or not the district has educational use for it?
Well, so if the document suggests that it has to be used for specific things, if it's in the ownership of the town,
Right.
what responsibility is it of the board or the administration to ensure that those things are happening?
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean? Because if there's if there are parameters around the transfer of ownership, who keeps track of those parameters and how does
I
that
see.
work?
It's a great question.
I see.
Yeah.
Mhm. Or even, is it MRPS that does the monitoring? I don't know. Maybe?
I mean,
Maybe
is
it's-
there a monitoring provision? I mean,
Yeah.
it's yeah, and some of these questions seem like they will be a little more pertinent when we're actually, if we were to enter into a negotiation deal with Roxbury.
Yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
when to ask, but
Yeah.
but
They need.
it's kind of like, if this, then these questions are
Yeah.
pertinent.
And I think the educational use, I mean. I think we can frame the educational use more as like, does the district have an active desire to keep this building? Like, is there a use that we want to keep this building for? And if the answer is no, we do not, like kind of have active plans to do something with the building, then I think we ask, does Roxbury want?
And it looks like, I didn't find what you mentioned about questions, but it does look like they have gotten some information just about the cost of maintaining the building from you. I'm not finding the questions, which would be, I'd like to see.
Tim?
Thanks. Sorry for all the trouble before. I guess I'd be curious about what we as a district have invested in the building since the merger and the current condition of the building, and whether there are any outstanding liens or debt affiliated with the building that we need to be aware of. That would certainly impact, I think, how we would approach any transaction to convey it to someone else. And I think I was going to ask, should we have something on the condition of the building, but I'd have to go dust off the Truex Collins report, because I presume that does a pretty good job of sort of what the building looks like now. I haven't thought about that for a while. but we should maybe just pull that back into the conversation.
And Jake asked this the last time, which is along the same lines as Tim's question, so I'm just adding it in.
Mhm.
And that might be a tricky question too, because it. I mean, it might be valuable, but to like 3 potential buyers.
It's okay. We're not answering these questions
Yeah.
now. We're just asking.
I
them.
know.
Would the buyer have to find community or find educational use? Because otherwise it would have to be offered to the town? Or
No, it has to be offered to the town first,
Yeah.
no
so
matter what.
if the town chooses not to take ownership.
Well, the question might be what constitutes as the town choosing not to take ownership of the building? Do they have to actively say no? If they sit on it for a certain period of time, can we assume no? What if we offer it to the town and the town never gets back to us?
Yeah, that goes to something I was thinking about
Yeah.
like what we have to offer it, but what would the terms of an offer be? I presume it would be some sort of like business reasonableness, right? Like a 30 or 60 day or whatever reasonableness period for the town to get back. But I think that's an important question about what the parameters of the offer have to be or should be. Because I think that implicates like sort of where we talked about before, like where Roxbury is on it, and you don't want to put it to them if they're not ready to make the decision right yet, because that would be unfair and not reasonable. I don't know.
Well, and I also think it was the question of like, what does Roxbury need to do to approve? So if it's a select board, that's going to be a different process. If they have to put it to like a town vote,
Right.
that takes more time. So, I think we'd have to give them the time they need for, to go through whatever process is required.
Yeah. I think just clarity on that point, like so we know what each one of these steps looks like from a timing and substance.
And so that's questions 10 and 11, basically up on the screen there. How did those help us determine whether or not this has educational value for the district?
I don't think a lot of these questions actually really determine those questions. I think we're just kind of at this point lining up all the questions we need.
Well, but I thought the question that we're looking at is what to do with the Roxbury building, and sort of there's a preliminary question about educational value, but that's not the end of it.
Yeah.
In my mind.
No, I understand. I just, as Jim said earlier in this meeting, if we determine no, it does not have educational value for our district for the foreseeable future, then yes, it kicks off a string of other questions, but I just don't want us to get confused.
Yeah.
That we're answering all these questions at once.
No.
I think we should stay focused on the initial question. And there are others that will follow based on the answer we have to that question.
I think it's also important for the board, again, for transparency's sake, to get these questions down, because they are questions that the town of Roxbury has.
Sure.
And because the district is in ownership of the building now, it would be our responsibility to find a lot of these questions out, right?
Yeah.
Or to provide these answers as best we can.
Well, and to be clear, I think honestly, up through 9 maybe do help us answer this initial question. I think we might be skirting more into the further on down the line now with some of these more recent questions.
That's okay.
If this app, then.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I think I disagree a little bit on that. I think it would help me a lot to know what the implications of a determination of a determination would be. Granted that the primary question is, is there an educational value to the thing? But if making that decision kicks off a series of consequences, I don't know what they are. I'd have trouble getting to that decision because it could have downstream impacts. And so I just want to, I recognize that, there's some sequencing here, but I think it is important to kind of know what what a decision will mean for us and for Roxbury.
Okay.
Another question that that's coming up for me, but I'm really uncertain about it is, does MRPS have any interest in asking like Central Vermont Supervisory Union or CVCC or any of the other surrounding districts,
Oh.
whether they might have an educational use? I don't know if that's,
Do we have a,
I don't know if that's
Ability?
within our realm or not.
It's a question and we're gonna write it down. That's what brainstorming's all about.
Is a- I mean, we could definitely write it down. I'm just reading the language. It seems to clearly make that the operation of the unified district or its educational programs doesn't seem to open the window for like the educational programs of another district.
No, but it would be, you could sell it
But
to another district.
you could sell it to another
Like,
district.
that's how I read that question, right?
Yes,
But it seems like we can't sell it to another district if the town of Roxbury says, yes, we
Right.
want
Yeah.
it.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it would determine whether we've got a potential buyer beyond Roxbury, but
Yeah, it goes in a potential buyer, yeah.
Yeah.
Because that, who knows what Roxbury thinks if they wanted another, maybe it's not necessarily, I mean, everybody would love to have an elementary school in that building, of course, but who knows, maybe there's other educational purposes that other districts have that Roxbury would prefer as opposed to taking ownership and trying to figure out what to do with the space. Although I know there are a lot of people with a lot of ideas about community use, but you know, having to answer that question might influence some folks.
Any other questions people can think of?
I think it's a pretty good list. I guess some questions for. Which one should we ask you to prioritize kind of for our next meeting?
I think
'Cause
what
there's-
might be the potential education uses,
And maybe some costs associated with them and.
Yeah.
Some practicality.
they'll be broad, just so
Yeah.
everybody's really clear, the cost will be broad, but we know how much a teacher's costs, like we
Yep.
know how much that stuff costs.
This is kind of interesting because there's the Roxbury community. And then there's the Roxbury student and family community. I'm wondering if it's our role or the select board's role or a joint effort, because I think that is actually like question number one for me, or at least I'm glad it's number two, is like. Maybe you're right, maybe there's a lot of interest and need for pre-K and after school and all these things that are very much still serving the families of the district. If the community doesn't agree with that, or maybe the select board does have a different use. I'm just trying to figure out how we will find out a genuine read on what the Roxbury community wants to use the building for. I don't know. It's not really a problem or even a question. It's more like sort of the who's on first, how do we, because I think that's one of the first things we need to find out is like, what is the interest or what is the need that these educational things would be serving? What's the need that's not being met right now that we would be putting this towards? Do we need more space? Do we need an offsite educational use? Do we need pre-K and after school, right? I don't know what those needs are. I don't know how to get an answer to that, which would then help me have an opinion about what to do with the building. Like, it's hard to add after the budget session we just went through, like, it's like, there's lots of things we need that we can't have already, so articulating another need feels challenging, but also like, if there is a very strong need that would be met, I don't know how to get at that sooner, but I suppose that's what we're asking, is that we're gonna keep talking about what needs that would serve if we kept it. What would be some educational uses?
Yep.
And
I don't know if we put this, but one other thing, I don't know why Jill's comment just made me think of it, but what's our sort of run rate monthly of costs that sitting on the bill? Did we already get that? Like, what are we spending monthly on maintenance and upkeep and utilities and stuff, just so we have an understanding of what the cost of not making a decision is?
yeah, we have those numbers.
They're easy to get anyway. They're not in front of us right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think my other comment on prioritizing things is I feel like a number of these questions are sort of farm out to the lawyer type questions, which we might be able
Yes.
to do sort of sooner than later to just kind of get our bearings on sort of the land we're wading through here.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's any danger or any. I don't think there's any good reason not to pass some of these legal questions along to Pietro and see.
Right.
Because I think Tim is right. There's the basic, do we have a desired educational use for this? But then I think there's also, you know, if we make a determination that puts us into a position where we're obligated to offer it to Roxbury with the idea that they could say yes, you know, what are those downstream implications, and what do we have to be thinking about that? Yeah.
And Pietro could probably tell us whether or not the merger document answers those questions for us, or if, and then if the answer is no, then maybe give us some guidance on how to answer them.
Yeah.
I did.
So I'm thinking two steps here. One, I think sooner rather than later, putting some potential uses and the costs of those uses, both human resource costs are financial costs.
Right.
And that question number 2, I think is beneficial to the board so that they can see it, right? Because
Mhm.
our community likes to say, let's make a bilingual program without actually thinking through what that actually means logistically and in reality. So that the board can talk about that transparently. And then the other piece I think would benefit the board is to actually have Pietro come or zoom in
Uh-huh.
to ask, which may potentially be in executive session, because oftentimes conversations with the board, I'd have to check on that to see if it would be an executive session conversation or not, but I
Oh.
think that a lot of these questions, it would benefit the board to actually be able to talk back and forth with Pietro and for him to study documents and statutes prior to that conversation, rather than
I think that's smart.
me
Yeah,
asking him.
Uh-huh.
I think
Yeah.
that's smart. And I think I'd have to go back and look at the executive session, but I think there's a provision that allows us to.
Because
have
it's
a
real
separate
estate.
discussion.
I think
Yeah,
it's real
real estate.
estate. You can go into exec session for that.
Legal advice as well is an okay reason.
Got
Yeah.
it.
So, which I'm just putting that out there that some people might not like that, but
Yeah.
that's the board's purview.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I just think it's gonna be hard to do it, hard and slow to do it by email.
And it doesn't give you a chance to do the back and forth.
Yeah.
So does it make sense for the next board meeting to talk about potential use? And then the board meeting following, have Pietro come in?
I think that makes a lot of
I
sense.
think
we
can.
could,
Yeah.
we could try that. I also want to leave a little space for board members who aren't here tonight, if they also have questions that are not on this list, but we can just say they can email those to you,
Yeah.
Libby, and you'll add them to the list, so.
And I can smudge some of these together because I do have answers to some of these around, yearly costs and that kind of stuff.
Right.
So, we figured that out and we know about liens and debts, not, like I can smudge that all together.
Yep. And then I think we do, if we're set on what are the questions we want answered, at least for tonight, you
Yes.
know, and
Yeah.
even some of us in this room might think of other questions after we leave. Should we spend a little bit of time on what happens after we've had the initial presentation from the administration and the lawyer and how we engage the community? Because that's another step in the process. Maybe we can spend a little time tonight just doing another version of this, of brainstorming. What is it that we want? Or what does this decision, what community engagement does this decision call us to do? And the decision first being whether or not MRPS has educational use for the building. I think one thing we could do after we've gotten the presentation from the administration and had a conversation with the lawyer, and that the board having a chance to chew on it, could then have something to share with the public and say, here's the direction we're going. Maybe it's not a final answer, but it's like, here's what we've learned and what we're kind of sitting with. And then we could either turn a board meeting into and do like we did with the budget last year, where we presented and then had question and answer and discussion with the community, or we could find another time outside of a board meeting to do that, or do both in order to allow for as much participation as possible. And we could do, a couple versions of that. I don't know. I don't think we have to, I think in some way we want to make sure that this is an asset of the districts. And I think we want to be taking care to say, this is these are our options and our initial thinking on those options. And now we want to hear what your initial thinking is on those options. So to me, that feels like the best way to do that is community forum. I think another version of that is we could do surveys online, but I think it's actually kind of hard to digest all of this and then respond in a survey. So that's why it seems like it's more community forum that could, like I said, take place during a board meeting or at a different time, or both, as far as options, having there be enough.
I think the forum idea is much better. I think especially if we put together, like, there's a no educational use scenario, maybe 2 or 3 other uses that we think are plausible and reasonable with potential and their costs, then I think we've done our work to kind of say, here's the work we did to put, reasonable options. What are we missing, and what do folks think about? I think that feels right to me, Mia.
There's a little bit of sequencing there. I mean, I think it's going to be a very different discussion with the community as a whole, if we know or don't know what Roxbury intends. So, because I think one of the first questions we're going to get from community members is, well, does Roxbury want to buy the building back? And if we don't have an answer to that question, then the question of kind of whether we want to hang on to it is a little different.
Hold on, Jill has her hand up.
Jill.
So our next board meeting, regularly scheduled one at Roxbury, is October 2nd. I was wondering if we could sort of build a cushion of time in the agenda for having that conversation in person. But now I'm wondering if October 2nd is too late, or would we have at least something for folks to respond to? I mean, if we're going to be there and we'll have a board meeting, we could take that opportunity to.
Well, and there are only 2 other board meetings between now and then, the 4th and the 18th. And if one of those has a presentation from the administration on our different options and the other has a conversation with our lawyer, then that gives us only a little bit of time, but maybe enough for us to say, oh, okay, here's what our initial thinking is, and bring it to the Roxbury community. I hear what you're saying, Jim, but I think and I understand why people would want to know the answer to that, but the answer to that is actually not germane to whether or not we have educational use for the building. Yes, it would be lovely if we knew if Roxbury wanted it or not, but I don't, but I know that that Roxbury is wrestling with their own kinds of questions, and I wouldn't want for us to have to like put it on them to answer those questions before we bring this to the community.
Yeah, I kind of get it, but I think yeah, if we have a forum in Roxbury about an educational use, I think we're gonna hear people say, reopen the school.
Sure.
But I don't think
And-
that's the conversation that would be had. That would be, the conversation in Roxbury would be like, this is what the board has heard. This is
Yes.
the legal advice from our
Yeah.
lawyer. This is the information we know. Would the town of Roxbury or would the community of Roxbury like to inform the board on any other pieces that we're not thinking about right now?
Sure, and I'm certain there would be people.
Keep
who
it wide
would-
open,
Yeah, and I'm sure there were people who would show up and say,
make it a school.
Reopen it,
Yep.
send our kids back there, and
That's okay.
that's okay. We would get that input and we would have to take it in and say. With that, within the context of which we exist and all that came before us,
Yes.
whether or not that is the direction that we go.
Yeah, okay, I'm convinced. I think there was a question of where we hold the forum. And how many forums we hold and what information, because if we hold one forum in Roxbury. We are likely going to. Get input that may not be representative of the
Yeah,
entire district sentiment.
yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
A fair concern.
I think maybe a key is kind of publishing these options, broad and wide. Sufficiently in advance of when we're going to hold a forum, just so at least the idea is out there and folks know that, this is the conversation we're having. So that it's not like we roll into a meeting and then just boom, put 4 ideas in front of people and say, what do you think? But after we can either get a story in local media or something just with what we've been thinking of as options, and then folks will have something to react to. I think might be a good way to go. And I do strongly agree that I was looking later on in the merger document, it set the value of that building at around $2.5 million. So while I think it's important to approach this sort of in partnership with Roxbury, I also think that, stewards of an asset that's worth that much, we have to think about how to maximize value for the district consistent with our legal obligations and fair partnership.
I think I also be cognizant that Roxbury gave it to us for $1 as well.
Yeah, certainly.
I mean, is there a downside to doing some sort of community survey as well? I mean, I know that has been done in several contexts, and I think there are a lot more people who have time, especially given that you don't have to be there at a certain time, and
What
takes a
would you
lot
ask?
shorter.
What would you be asking?
What would you be asking at a forum?
I wouldn't be asking anything. I'd just be getting.
I mean, I think you could put out, you could just put out kind of the information we have, and you could either ask, questions about whether the uses and the expenses associated with them have appeal to people. Or you could just ask, as you might in a forum, just a blank space, like,
Thoughts.
give us your thoughts.
I look forward to those thoughts.
Yeah.
I do recall when the board voted to send kids to Union. There was a lot of comment virtually, because I think we were in Roxbury. And I do, it did feel like there was a lot of engagement, although that whole process was way more rushed than we would have liked. There was a lot of engagement.
Yeah.
From the
Yeah.
community in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm hearing you say is if Montpelier residents wouldn't come out to Roxbury, they could join the Zoom call to be part of that community forum. I also think there's nothing wrong with us saying, okay, and then
Another one
let's
here.
say that happens on a Wednesday night where you're like, okay, Friday happy hour or Sunday morning or Saturday morning at the library or something. I don't know. We do something that is a follow-up that happens in
Totally.
Montpelier. I think one downside, Jim, is that if what we're asking people for the survey is if we've got, let's say, here's the option where the district does not hold on to the building, and here are 2 or 3 options of what we could do if we held on to the building. It's just a lot of information for people to read on their screen and then give us. So I think we tried that with a different kind of survey, and I remember getting feedback that they were like, I don't even know how to answer the questions. But my mind is not a very reliable memory source, so I might be.
Or could we have a survey that's open after the forum for a while, where people can tune in?
Just as like a public comment, just like as a, you know, like
Yeah.
they do for new laws
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah,
A
that's a-
public comment form that's wide open on our webpage.
Right, right.
Yeah.
People could watch the community forum and then weigh in,
Yeah.
sure. And that could have
What are those called?
a public comment period.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Close, close. And then, so just thinking about timeline, if we did that on October 2nd and then had a public comment period that was open for a couple of weeks following that, then that does get us pretty close to early November.
Yeah.
When we have said we would really like to have a decision made final in order to be able to inform this year's budget. And maybe that decision is, no, we don't have enough information, so we're gonna have to hold on to the building for 1 more year. But maybe it's not that decision. Maybe it's, we actually have learned enough in order to be able to make a final decision. I don't know. We'll see. But I think if we go through all of this by the end of October, and I might just be overly optimistic, seems like we would be able to have enough information.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Because again, the other reality of what other things are gelling for our budget will also be coming apparent in
By then.
November, December.
Yeah.
That would, back to our sort of SOP, like what other decisions are influencing this?
Or what other decisions would be impacted
Would be
by this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we want to be taking special care to make sure that we're giving in the extra effort to reach folks who are historically marginalized, are not feeling like they can engage as easily. It does make me wonder if community forum and public comment period, maybe that's enough, but I don't know. I'm just putting that out there. It certainly has 2 different, you can be in person or you can be virtual. That has a benefit as far as accessibility goes, because people can choose.
I
All
think
of our presentations and things can be translated on the website too.
It turns out we could be put.
Translation, yeah, would be really helpful,
Yeah,
at least
putting-
into sort of like the top 5 languages that are spoken in the district. I don't know.
And putting it on the website, putting the link on the website too, so people can watch it later.
Yep.
During the public comment period. Sending out. Putting it in we're gonna have principal updates. Back again.
Yeah,
so
yep.
put it in those things.
Because again, the thing that sort of helps bookend the public comment that we want is us clearing what our question is and then saying the deadline by which we're making it. And that was one of the things we felt like we were sort of squishy on, that we had made sure we wanted to say.
Right.
So everybody in the public knows this is the question we're wrestling with, so they know what they're responding to, and that we are gonna make a decision.
It's our
That
aim
kind
to,
of sets
it's our
the-
aim to make a
That's our
decision
aim to make a
anyway.
decision, Even if the decision is not to make a decision,
Yeah.
but that kind of.
That's a really
helps
good point,
bookend
Jill.
the Public comment window.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think so. I'm back to our planning section of our process document. Question 3A and 3A and B are challenging for me to answer. at the outset with, it feels like a little, like not quite enough. I don't know what I don't know yet. How will the board know they have gathered enough information from stakeholders, and what will the board do if they cannot gather enough information from stakeholders?
I mean, I think that that a time frame is a reasonable thing. And I think that it's the responsibility of board members to make decisions when people don't tell us what to do. That's what we're elected to do.
Most definitely.
You know, I mean, if people don't step forward and say what they want, then that's why we're in this role. I mean. And, you know, sometimes I wonder, you know, if people don't like the decisions that we make, then they have to find another person to vote into the spot. You know what I mean? And sort of like, that's where I'm sort of like, am I making the decisions that I think that my community wants me to make, or am I making the decisions that I think are best in serving my values and what I want, what I hope for everyone? That is something I kind of wrestle with sometimes.
It's a tough question. And I think one of the reasons that it's hard for me to answer questions 3A and B now is I kind of want to have tried out the community engagement first to see, oh, we held a community forum and nobody showed up, or we held a community forum and 100% of the people said X. I don't know. And then that might be an indication to us that we have, like you said, you know, done our level best to engage the community. And so therefore we don't need to answer 3B because we have enough of it. Or we would say, oh gosh, we still feel like we don't have enough inputs. Let's do another round, or I don't know. Anyway, I don't think we have to answer those two questions tonight. I just was naming that they're hard. for me
They're
to
hard,
answer.
yeah.
Are we already in number 4?
What's number 4?
Yeah,
What
I
data
think,
will
What
the
data
board-
will the board need the administration to obtain for them?
I think that's.
Well,
what we're
that's in,
collecting too.
yeah, that's in one of the questions we just came up with.
yeah,
Yeah, this is, so, yeah. Yep. And then we've already named a aspirational timeline.
yeah, and I think with 3A and B, they're gonna be kind of judgment calls.
Yeah, we'll see. Maybe one of the benefits of trying this out is that, oh, that will give us information that will be able to make it easier to answer those two questions ahead of time. The next time we do this, I don't know.
And one of the later ones, I think, is like, what's the impact of doing nothing? Right, so that might help inform A and B once we get to that point.
Yeah.
If we don't make a decision, there'll be this expense or this risk or this whatever, this positive, I don't know.
And then as I go through this process document, the section that's titled factors to consider throughout the process, I think this is a little bit of, here are questions we've listed here, and also like, as we are going through it, things for us to keep in mind. I don't think we have to that's how I read the factors to consider going through, to consider throughout the process. For example, when we get the presentation from the administration on here are the different options, we should be asking ourselves, if we were to go down option A, B, C, or D, is it a continuation of a current goal, or does it deviate from stated goals of the school district? Like, that's when we would raise that, I think, as a board for ourselves to help us answer which of these options should we choose.
We've got a little reminder here, and I don't remember this, but the state may have put the restriction on the use of the building and transfer. As part of the merger document that may not have been something the two towns cared about.
Which we
Or-
find out in the statute,
Which
if
we
that were
find
the
out in the
case,
statute,
if
yeah.
that was the case, yeah.
Yeah, so Pietro might have the answer to that.
Yep.
That also might. If that's the case, then the chance that there's a little guidance around what community use is might be better. If it's just a term we put in and didn't define. That might be a little trickier.
Or if it's a state term,
Yeah.
then the Agency of Education would have to define it for us.
Well, they might already defined it if they,
Lord help us.
I mean, it does say the school board determines at its discretion is or are unnecessary to the continued operation. I
yes,
guess
we
that's
have, we have a lot of latitude, I think.
I think we've gone as far into the board planning meeting as we can go in one night.
Yep,
Good job.
I agree.
All right.
Yeah, I actually think it was really helpful having done the work we did last week
Oh,
to
definitely.
facilitate this discussion.
Oh, hey, hi, Tim.
Hey.
Hey, still
Yeah,
here.
no,
We haven't seen your face at all because Libby's been sharing her screen so we could all look at those notes. So now we can see your face.
My apologies. No, I think it was helpful to walk through like this and kind of raise up issues, and I don't know, I'm encouraged by the work we've done so far for the process going forward.
Yeah, I don't think you have a much clearer roadmap of how we want this to play out. So you will get some of the scenarios just on basic education, then we'll Pietro, and then we'll do the community forum. And I think we want to really talk probably at the next meeting about how we want to get information on the community forum out so we can get that out well ahead of time. So we
Mhm.
may not have all that information till after the meeting with Pietro, and then
Right.
probably we'll have like 2 weeks to get word out.
Will the questions document be in the minutes?
We can link them in the minutes.
And that's usually like by the end of the week or
Well, I'm sure Anna can put them into the board meeting packet for this week too.
for this week?
Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent. I think we can move on to policy monitoring. And if we take 30 minutes on this, I didn't want to mention the possibility. So we have 3 policy monitoring reports to approve: A1 board member conflict of interest, A20 board meetings, agenda presentations and distribution, and F20 fiscal management. Do I have a motion to approve the 3 consent agendas? Or not consent agendas, policy monitoring report.
Policy monitoring reports.
Bueller?
I move that we accept the 3 policy monitoring reports, A1, A20, and F20.
Thank you, Jill. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion or questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion to adjourn. Go watch Tim Walls.
He's not gonna be on for another 2 hours.
Oh my
No
God.
need to rush
Go
home.
watch all the lead up to Tim Walls. Uh,
I move to adjourn. Move to adjourn.
do you have a second?
I'll second that.
And it might be 3 hours, given how the
Yeah.
last 2 nights have gone. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thanks all.
The way to bring